Listen closely, because what you're about to hear is not for everyone. Most people will scroll past this. Most people will feel uncomfortable and leave. But if you're still here, it's not by accident. There is something different about you. Something you've felt your entire life, but could never fully explain. A quiet awareness, a strange sense that you don't belong here, at least not in the way others do. And what if I told you that feeling is not confusion? It's confirmation. Because there are rare signs, deep, undeniable signs, that only a few people on this earth carry. And those signs point to one truth. You were never ordinary. You were chosen. And the world was never meant to understand you. You've always felt like you were observing life, instead of fully being inside it. Like you're present, but also distant at the same time. You can sit in a crowded room and still feel alone. Not because you're disconnected, but because you see more than what's on the surface. You notice things others ignore. Energy shift, hidden intention, silent emotions. And this awareness didn't come from nowhere. It came from going through things most people wouldn't survive mentally. Pain shaped you. Isolation refined you. Confusion forced you to search deeper. While others were distracted, you were awakening. And here's the truth most won't tell you. The higher your awareness rises, the more misunderstood you become. People start to pull away. Conversations feel empty. You begin to outgrow environments, relationships, even old versions of yourself. And it feels lonely. But that loneliness is not a punishment. It's preparation. Because a chosen one is not designed to blend in. They are designed to see through illusions. And once you see, you can't unsee. You've probably noticed how certain people react to you without you saying a word. Some are drawn to you instantly. Others feel uncomfortable, even threatened. That's not random. Your energy exposes things. It reflects truth back to people. And not everyone is ready to face themselves. So instead of understanding you, they misunderstand you. Instead of supporting you, they question you. And sometimes they try to silence you. Not because you're wrong, but because your presence disrupts their illusions. You've also felt it, haven't you? That internal pull towards something greater. A calling you can't fully describe. A feeling that you're meant for more, even if you don't know what more looks like yet. That's one of the rarest signs. Because not everyone feels that pull. Most people are comfortable staying where they are. But you feel restless. Not because you're lost, but because you're being guided. Guided to grow. Guided to evolve. Guided to step into something bigger than yourself. And the journey is not easy. There are moments where you question everything. Moments where you feel like giving up. Moments where the weight of it all feels too heavy. But every time you rise again. That's another sign. You don't break the same way others do. You bend, you struggle, you feel the pain deeply. But something inside you refuses to stay down. That resilience is not normal. It's built, forged through trials that were never meant to destroy you, but to reveal who you really are. And here's what makes it even more intense. You often feel like you're living two lives at once. One on the outside, where you function, interact, and move through the world. And one on the inside, where everything is deeper, quieter, more real. That inner world is where your truth lives. And the more you listen to it, the stronger your clarity becomes. But the world will try to pull you away from that clarity. It will distract you, doubt you, condition you to ignore your instincts. Because a fully awakened person cannot be controlled. And control is what most systems rely on. So they label you. They question your thinking. They make you feel like you're too much or too different. But what they call too much is actually your power. What they call different is actually your alignment. You were never meant to shrink yourself to fit into a limited world. You were meant to expand, even if it makes others uncomfortable. And deep down, you already know this. You felt it in quiet moments. That inner voice that says, keep going, even when everything around you feels uncertain. That voice is not random. It's guidance. And the more you trust it, the clearer your path becomes. This journey is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been, beneath the noise, the conditioning, and the expectations. And once you step into that truth, everything begins to shift, slowly but powerfully. Because when a chosen one finally accepts their path, they stop chasing validation and start walking in purpose. So if you've made it this far, if something inside you feels activated, then this message wasn't random. It found you for a reason. Now the question is, will you keep ignoring what you feel? Or will you finally embrace it? If this resonated with you, don't stay silent. Drop a comment and share what you've been experiencing, because your voice matters more than you think. Like this video, so it reaches others who feel the same, but don't yet have the words for it. And subscribe to Return to Awakening, because this is just the beginning of what you're about to understand. There were moments you almost convinced yourself you were just overthinking everything. That maybe you were imagining it all. That maybe you should just be like everyone else. But every time you tried to ignore it, that feeling came back stronger. That quiet knowing. That deep inner awareness that refuses to be silenced. You tried to fit in, but it felt like wearing something that was never made for you. You tried to follow the same path as others, but something inside you kept resisting. That resistance is not rebellion. It's alignment. Because a chosen one cannot fully operate in spaces that contradict their truth. And this is where things start to shift even deeper. You begin to notice patterns, not just in your life, but in everything around you. You see cycles repeating in people. You see how emotions drive decisions. You see how fear controls behavior. And once you see these patterns, you can't go back to being unaware. It changes how you interact. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what you allow into your space. This is why your circle gets smaller. Not because you're losing people, but because you're outgrowing what no longer aligns. And that process can feel painful. Letting go is never easy, especially when it involves people, places, or versions of yourself you once held onto. But every release creates space. Space for clarity. Space for peace. Space for something more aligned with who you're becoming. And here's something most people don't realize. Your sensitivity is not weakness. It's one of the rarest signs. You feel deeply. Not just your own emotions, but the energy of others. You can walk into a room and instantly sense the atmosphere. You can feel when something is off, even when no one says a word. And yes, it can be overwhelming. There are times you wish you could just turn it off. Times you wish you didn't feel so much. But that depth is part of your awareness. It allows you to connect beyond the surface, to understand without explanation, to see what others overlook. And in a world that often operates on distraction, that kind of awareness is rare. You've also experienced moments where everything suddenly makes sense. Brief flashes of clarity, where your past, your struggles, your questions, all connect in a way you never saw before. Those moments don't last forever, but they leave an impact. They shift something inside you. And after that, you're never quite the same again. You start trusting yourself more, listening to your instincts more, questioning things you once accepted without thought. And that's where your transformation accelerates. But here's the part that most people aren't prepared for. Growth creates distance. Distance between who you were and who you're becoming. Distance between you and people who no longer understand your path. And sometimes that distance feels like loss. But it's not loss. It's transition. Because every level of awareness requires a different version of you. And not everyone is meant to come with you to that level. That doesn't make you better than anyone. And it doesn't make them wrong. It just means your paths are different. And accepting that is part of your evolution. There's also something else you've probably noticed. You're drawn to truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges everything you once believed. You don't run from it. You lean into it. Because deep down, you'd rather face reality than live in illusion. And that mindset sets you apart instantly. Because most people avoid truth when it disrupts their comfort. But you've learned that discomfort often leads to clarity. And clarity leads to freedom. That's why your journey feels so intense at times. Because you're not just living life. You're understanding it on a deeper level. And that level of awareness comes with responsibility. Responsibility to grow. Responsibility to stay conscious. Responsibility to not fall back into patterns you've already outgrown. It's not always easy. There are days where you feel tired. Days where you wish things were simpler. Days where you question if this path is even worth it. But then something happens. A realization. A moment of clarity. A quiet reminder from within. And it brings you back. Back to your awareness. Back to your purpose. Back to yourself. Because no matter how far you drift, you always find your way back. That's not coincidence. That's who you are becoming. There's a phase on this path that almost no one talks about. The phase where everything goes quiet. No clear signs. No strong emotions. No obvious direction. Just silence. And in that silence, you start to wonder if you've lost it. Lost the connection. Lost the clarity. Lost that sense of purpose that once felt so real. But what feels like disconnection is actually refinement. Because not every stage of growth feels powerful. Some stages feel empty. Some feel slow. Some feel like nothing is happening at all. But beneath that stillness, something is being built. Your patience, your discipline, your ability to stand firm, even when there's no immediate reward. This is where many people give up. They mistake silence for failure. They mistake stillness for stagnation. But a chosen one learns to stay, even in the quiet. Because they understand something deeper. Not every transformation is loud. Some of the most powerful shifts happen where no one can see them. And during this phase, you begin to detach in a different way. Not from people, but from outcomes. You stop chasing immediate validation. You stop needing everything to make sense right away. You start moving with trust instead of constant certainty. And that shift changes everything. Because now, your actions are no longer driven by fear. They're guided by alignment. You begin to move differently. Speak differently. Even think differently. Things that once triggered you no longer have the same effect. Situations that once confused you now feel clear. And people notice it, even if they can't explain it. There's something about your presence now. It's calmer, stronger, more grounded, not because life got easier, but because you got deeper. And depth creates stability. You're no longer easily shaken by external chaos, because you've built something internal that doesn't collapse under pressure. That's one of the rarest levels to reach, where your peace isn't dependent on what's happening around you, but comes from how you understand what's happening within you. And here, where it gets even more profound, you start seeing your past differently. The pain, the confusion, the moments that once felt unfair, they begin to make sense, not in a way that justifies everything, but in a way that reveals purpose within it. You realize those experiences didn't just happen to you. They shaped how you see, how you feel, how you understand the world. They gave you depth, and that depth becomes part of your strength. Because now, when others are lost, you don't just give surface-level advice. You understand. You've been in places where there were no clear answers. You've faced moments where everything felt uncertain. So when you speak, it carries weight, not because you're trying to sound wise, but because you've lived what others are still trying to figure out. And that's another sign. You don't just learn. You embody what you learn. It becomes part of how you exist, part of how you move through the world. And slowly, without even trying, you begin to influence others, not by forcing anything, but simply by being who you are. Your energy shifts conversations. Your perspective opens minds. Your presence makes people reflect. And sometimes that impact is silent. You may never hear about it. You may never see the full effect of it. But it's happening, because authenticity always leaves a mark. And the more aligned you become, the less you feel the need to prove anything. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't ready to understand. You stop seeking approval from those who don't see your path. Not out of ego, but out of clarity. You know who you are, and that knowing is enough. But even with all this growth, there's still one challenge that remains: staying consistent in your awareness. Because the world doesn't stop testing you. Old patterns try to return. Old thoughts try to resurface. Old versions of you try to pull you back. And sometimes, you feel that pull, that urge to go back to what's familiar, even if it no longer aligns. But this time, something is different. You recognize it. You pause. You reflect. You choose differently. And that choice is where your true power lies. Not in never facing challenges, but in how you respond when they appear. That's the real transformation. Not becoming perfect, but becoming aware enough to choose growth again and again. And then there comes a moment that changes everything again. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. A moment where you realize you're not searching anymore. You're seeing. You're no longer chasing answers outside of yourself, because something inside you has become steady, grounded, clear, and for the first time, you trust it fully. That constant need for validation begins to fade. That urge to ask others, "Am I doing this right?" starts to disappear. Because deep down you already know. And that knowing doesn't come from ego. It comes from alignment. You've spent so much time questioning yourself, doubting your path, second-guessing your instincts, that when clarity finally settles in, it feels almost unfamiliar, but peaceful, very peaceful. And in that peace, you begin to notice something else. You're no longer reacting the way you used to. Situations that once pulled you into chaos now pass through you without shaking your core. People who once triggered you no longer hold that power, not because they changed, but because you did. You've created space within yourself, space to observe instead of immediately react, space to understand instead of assume, space to choose instead of repeat. And that space is freedom, a freedom most people don't even realize they're missing, because they're still caught in automatic patterns, still reacting without awareness, still living in cycles they don't question. But you've stepped outside of that loop. And once you step outside, you can never fully go back in. That's why your perspective feels so different now. You don't just see what's happening. You see why it's happening. You see the cause behind the effect, the pattern behind the behavior, the truth behind the illusion. And that level of awareness can feel isolating at times, because it's hard to explain something that others haven't experienced yet. It's hard to put into words, a knowing that goes beyond logic. So sometimes you stay quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you realize not everyone is ready to hear it. And that realization brings a different kind of strength, the strength to speak when it matters, and the wisdom to remain silent when it doesn't. You no longer feel the need to prove your awareness. You no longer feel the need to wake everyone up, because you understand something deeper now. Awakening is not forced. It's realized. Each person reaches it in their own time, through their own experiences, in their own way. And your role is not to control that process. Your role is to live your truth fully. And by doing that, you naturally become a reflection for others, a reminder that there is more depth, more awareness, more meaning beyond what most people settle for. And without even trying, you start attracting different kinds of people. People who think deeper, people who question more, people who are also searching or awakening. The connections begin to feel different, less surface level, more real. Conversations carry substance. Silence feels comfortable. Understanding flows without constant explanation. And in those moments, you realize something powerful. You were never truly alone. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't meet you where you were. But now, as you continue to evolve, you begin to cross paths with those who can. And that changes everything. Because growth is no longer something you carry alone. It becomes something you share, something you exchange, something that expands through connection. But even with these new connections, you don't lose yourself anymore. That's the difference. Before, you may have adapted too much, adjusted too much, dimmed parts of yourself to maintain harmony. But now, you stand in who you are, fully, without apology, without needing to shrink. And that authenticity becomes your foundation, unshaken by opinions, unaffected by temporary judgments, untouched by the need to be accepted by everyone, because you've already accepted yourself. And that is one of the highest levels of awakening. And just when you think you've reached your highest level, life introduces you to another layer, a deeper one, because this journey doesn't end. It evolves. There's always another level of awareness waiting, another truth to uncover, another part of yourself to understand. And this is where things become even more refined. You start to notice the subtle battles, not the obvious ones, but the quiet ones within your own mind. The thoughts that try to creep back in, The doubts that show up unexpectedly. The moments where your old identity tries to reclaim space. But now, you don't fight them the same way. You observe them. You don't panic. You don't react immediately. You watch. And in that observation, something powerful happens. Those thoughts begin to lose their control. Because you're no longer identifying with them. You're recognizing them as patterns, not truths. And that shift is mastery, not controlling every thought, but understanding which ones deserve your attention and which ones don't. You begin to choose your focus more intentionally. And what you focus on starts shaping your reality in a more conscious way. Not through fantasy, but through awareness. You realize that your energy is one of your greatest assets. Where you place it, what you give it to, who you allow it to be influenced by. All of it matters. So you become more selective. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. You stop entertaining things that drain you. You stop engaging in conversations that lower your awareness. You stop investing time in spaces that don't align with your growth. And at first, that level of selectiveness can feel isolating again. But this time, it feels different. It feels intentional. You're not being pushed away. You're choosing your alignment. And that choice brings a new kind of peace. A quieter peace. A more stable peace. Not dependent on constant highs, but grounded in understanding. You also begin to realize something about time. Not in the way most people see it, but in how it relates to your growth. You stop rushing. You stop feeling like you're behind. Because you understand. Everything you went through happened exactly when it needed to. Every delay had a reason. Every challenge had a purpose. Every moment of confusion was part of your unfolding. And when you truly accept that, pressure starts to dissolve. You move with intention, not urgency. You act when it feels aligned, not when you feel forced. And that shift changes how you experience life completely. You're no longer chasing a destination. You're living the process, fully aware, fully present. And in that presence, you start to notice the smallest details. The way your thoughts shift throughout the day. The way your energy responds to different environments. The way your intuition speaks, quietly but consistently. And the more you pay attention, the stronger that intuition becomes. It starts guiding you in ways that logic can't always explain. A feeling to go somewhere, and something meaningful happens. A sense to avoid something, and later you understand why. These moments build trust. Not blind trust, but experienced trust. Because you've seen what happens when you listen. And when you don't. And over time, you stop ignoring it. You start moving with it. And that's when life begins to feel different. Not perfect. Not without challenges. But aligned. There's a flow to it. Things begin to connect in ways that feel natural, not forced. Opportunities appear at the right time. Conversations happen when they're needed. Insights come exactly when you're ready to understand them. And while others may call it coincidence, you see it for what it is. A result of being in alignment with yourself. And at this level, you no longer need constant reassurance that you're on the right path. Because you can feel it. In your decisions. In your energy. In your peace. That quiet certainty becomes your compass, and then something even deeper begins to happen. You start letting go of the need to label everything. No more forcing meanings. No more trying to define every experience the moment it happens. You allow things to unfold naturally. And in doing that, you begin to experience life in a way that feels more real than ever before. Not filtered through constant analysis, but felt through presence. Because now, you trust the process enough to not rush understanding. You've learned that some truths reveal themselves over time, not in an instant. And that patience unlocks a different kind of wisdom, a wisdom that isn't borrowed from others, but built through your own lived awareness. You also begin to notice how little you need to feel whole. Things that once seemed important start to lose their weight. The need to impress, the need to compete, the need to constantly prove your worth. It fades, not because you've given up, but because you've outgrown it. You realize your value was never something to earn. It was something to recognize. And once you truly see that, you stop chasing validation in all its forms, externally and even internally. You no longer need to constantly reassure yourself. You no longer question your worth every time something doesn't go your way. Because your foundation is no longer fragile. It's built on understanding. And understanding doesn't collapse easily. There's also a shift in how you handle uncertainty. Before, it may have created anxiety, a need to control outcomes, a fear of the unknown. But now, you move through uncertainty with a different mindset. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're no longer afraid of not having them. That fear loses its grip, and in its place comes curiosity. You begin to see the unknown not as a threat, but as a space of possibility, a space where growth happens, a space where new paths reveal themselves. And this perspective frees you, because you're no longer resisting what you can't control. You're working with it, flowing with it, learning from it. And that shift changes your entire experience of life. You also start becoming more aware of your words. Not just what you say, but how you say it and why. You realize that words carry energy. They can build or break, clarify or confuse, connect or divide. So you become intentional. You speak less, but with more meaning. And when you do speak, people listen differently. Because there's weight behind your words now. Not forced, but felt. And even in silence, your presence communicates something. Calm, clarity, control. Not control over others, but control over yourself. And that kind of presence is rare. You've also reached a point where you can sit with yourself, without distraction. No need to constantly fill the silence. No urge to escape your own thoughts. Because your mind is no longer a place of chaos. It's a place of awareness. And that relationship with yourself becomes one of your greatest strengths. Because no matter where you go, no matter what changes, you carry that stability within you. And with that stability comes a deeper level of independence. Not isolation, but self-sufficiency. You don't rely on external things to define your state anymore. You enjoy them. You appreciate them. But you're not dependent on them. And that distinction gives you freedom most people spend their lives searching for. Freedom from needing everything to go a certain way. Freedom from being controlled by circumstances. Freedom from losing yourself in temporary situations. Because now, you remain centered, no matter what shifts around you. And at this level, even challenges begin to look different. You don't immediately label them as bad. You look deeper. You ask, what is this showing me? What is this trying to refine in me? And that question alone transforms how you experience difficulty. It turns obstacles into insight. It turns setbacks into direction. It turns pressure into growth. And while the experience may still be uncomfortable, it's no longer meaningless. It has purpose, and that purpose keeps you grounded. And then you reach a realization that very few ever fully accept. Not everything is meant to be understood immediately. Some things are meant to be experienced first, felt deeply, lived through completely, before their meaning reveals itself. And once you accept that, you stop forcing clarity. You stop exhausting yourself trying to figure everything out at once. You allow life to unfold in layers, one realization at a time, one experience at a time. And in doing that, you begin to move with a kind of ease that doesn't come from having all the answers, but from trusting that the answers will come when they're meant to. This is where your energy becomes even more refined. You become aware of what truly deserves your attention. Not everything does. Not every opinion. Not every situation. Not every reaction from others. You start asking yourself, is this worth my energy? And if the answer is no, you let it pass, without guilt, without over-explaining, without feeling the need to engage. That level of discipline protects your peace, because now you understand. Peace is not something you find. It's something you maintain. Through awareness, through boundaries, through conscious choices. And boundaries become a natural part of who you are. Not harsh, not reactive, but clear. You no longer tolerate what drains you. You no longer entertain what disrespects your growth. And the most powerful part, you don't need to announce it. People feel it. They sense what you allow and what you don't, and they adjust accordingly, or they distance themselves. Either way, it aligns your environment with your evolution. You also begin to see how much of the world operates on autopilot. Patterns repeated without awareness. Beliefs accepted without questioning. Reactions triggered without reflection. And instead of judging it, you understand it, because you were once there too. Unaware, reactive, moving without deeper understanding. So now, you observe with compassion, not superiority, because real awareness doesn't create ego. It dissolves it. It reminds you that everyone is on their own path, at their own pace, learning what they need to learn, when they're ready to learn it. And that understanding creates a different kind of patience. You stop expecting others to see what you see. You stop trying to force perspectives onto people. You simply live your truth and allow others the space to find theirs. And in that space, you become lighter, because you're no longer carrying the weight of trying to change everything around you. You focus on what you can control: your actions, your responses, your alignment. And that focus strengthens you day by day, moment by moment. You also begin to recognize the difference between distraction and alignment. Not everything that feels good is right for you. Not everything that looks appealing is meant for your path. And your awareness of that becomes sharper. You start sensing misalignment early, before it fully pulls you in, before it drains your energy. And because you recognize it sooner, you step away sooner. That ability saves you from unnecessary cycles, from repeating the same lessons again and again. And over time, your path becomes clearer, not because life stops being complex, but because your understanding of it deepens. You no longer see things in extremes, right or wrong, good or bad. You see nuance. You see layers. You see how everything is connected, and how every experience contributes to your awareness. And this perspective brings a quiet kind of confidence, not loud, not needing attention, but steady, unshaken, because it's built on something real, something you've lived, something you've understood, from the inside out.